Welcome to Musings episode 10 on Webtoons. Some of the shows that I watched over the last year, such as Killer Paradox, Marry My Husband, and in the past, Itaewon Class and Hellbound, even movies like Concrete Utopia, all have one thing in common. And that is, as many of you will know, they're all based on Korean webtoons. So in this episode, I will talk about webtoons, give you some brief history of how they started, and then I'll talk about my favorite webtoons that I don't think have been that popular outside of Korea. Okay, so delve into the history of webtoons. The word webtoon itself was coined in Korea. So it's a combination of web, meaning the internet, and cartoon. And before webtoon, I think people outside of Korea may have been more familiar with manga. And a similar word, of course, is manhwa, and it means comics. But with the advent of the internet and the prevalent use of it, it became Webtoon, especially through Neighbor. So Neighbor, spelled Naber, I'm sure it's familiar to many of you outside of Korea, is the biggest portal service in Korea. So it's much bigger here than Google. And they started Webtoon and then began exporting their Webtoons to other countries. So Webtoons are published twice a week. It could be a Monday and a Wednesday, or let's say a Tuesday and a Thursday. And so they have usually a format of 80 cuts. And so they're published in a way on a weekly basis. So twice a week for many weeks. So it's a series. The Korean word for that would be a yeonje. So the more popular ones, and I'll talk about one in particular, can go on for years, more than a decade, which speaks to their popularity. Okay, so doing some research on the web, I have looked at many articles, both in Korean as well as in English. And so in terms of accessibility, the one that I would recommend is an article by Eugene Kim. We would pronounce it Kim Eugene. And it's titled All About Korean Webtoons: Platforms, History, Artists, and More in 2021. So it was published on the web in 2021. And I'll give you the link to it, which you can log on to later and read for yourself. And so in this article, Eugene talks about the history of webtoons and some of the problems with it, which I will summarize briefly. And then I'll also add my take about why I like Webtoon, but some things that maybe I wish were better. So, according to Kim Eugene or Eugene Kim, uh, the two key problems with Webtoons are the contracts, because a lot of the profits are taken by the agency that employs the authors, the creators of this intellectual property, the content creator, as well as piracy. The fact that even though they're all copyrighted, they sometimes may be offered for free through a pirated version online. So those are the two critical problems cited by Kim Hughes. And oh, by the way, the backdrop, I wanted to evoke Itaewon, so I had Midjourney from a background which could evoke Itaewon Class. So you have someone looking like Roy standing behind me. So I'm kind of substituting Roy here. Okay, so the article is very good because it goes into quite a bit of detail, and has an interview with one of the greatest webtoons of all time, and that is Musing. And so she quotes the author, Yunteo, who chronicled how he made Musing in Musing, Making Story. And there he talked about how hard it was to create Musing, where it's almost like making a movie. So he had a staff of 6 people. So he would work on the, of course, story, the scenario, and sketch the rough outline of the drawings, to quote the article, in circles and lines, and the staff would do the rest in terms of filling in the um, design and the details. So you can imagine the amount of work involved. Uh, and so, yeah, professional agencies, and so without the smaller agencies, um, without 6 people helping the author out, the time pressure would be enormous. So that's why I compare it to a movie, because it's like a movie where you have the gaffers, or the lighting people, and you have the sound people, in addition to the actors. So you don't see the so-called staff, because the camera is focused on the actors, but the crew that is needed to publish a webtoon, and if you're doing it for years, uh, the undertaking is massive. And so we're not just talking about one drawing, but 80 cuts. So 80 cuts a week is a tremendous amount of work that's needed. And the fans almost have this sense of ownership about it belongs to them. And so, given the comment system that you have with Webtoons, where a big part of it is what people say and say to those comments, the pressure on producing Webtoons can be enormous. And some agencies help them with so-called editors, but the editors sometimes manage more than one author. In fact, there was a K-drama on Webtoons, and so that took you behind the scenes of the kind of ego boosting that sometimes has to go on with authors who are burnt out. And so it's almost, again, like movies where you have actors or directors who are not just feeling it, and then it's up to the supporting not only director but the producer, their agents to boost their morale. So a lot of that goes on, and so the editor sometimes Yunteo, I think, in this case, because he's such a famous author, would have had an easier time. But if you're someone new and have to prove yourself, I think a lot of the responsibility is pushed back onto him or her, such as even proofreading. And as an author myself, of, not webtoons, but of movies and articles and so on, the post production, so to speak, can be just finding out all the errors that you don't want to be discovered later. And that can be hard. That's a lot of work that is involved. So, given that the authors, content creators are doing so much, you would think that they should get a fair share of the profits, and yet it says in the article that in some cases 90% of I think it was sale. I hope it's sales, but it's taken up by the agency. If it's 90% of the profits, I mean that would leave practically nothing to the author. But a lion's share is taken up by the agency, despite the author doing almost all of the work, especially if he or she is not getting help from the editors. And as for the piracy issue, I think in Korea alone, you have more than 90 sites that pirate the webtoons, and also the word piracy means that you're not paying for it. So this dilutes the sales and profitability of creating original content. Okay, so why did Webtoon become so popular and so big? And the key word that is often used in Korea is OSMU, an acronym which stands for one source, multiple use. And of course, what that means is you can start with a Webtoon, but then that one original source can be reinvented through a different medium, such as in a OTT series or a movie. So in 2000, year 2000, which would be this being the year 2024, 24 years back, there was a very famous Korean Webtoon writer, Kang Full. And so he has been writing Webtoons for 26 years now. And many of his work have been adapted into movies such as The Neighbor. And you have other webtoons that have become K-drama, such as Musing, True Beauty, which made a star out of Chaonu, Extraordinary You, Itaewon Class, which I am paying an homage to behind me, and Cheese in the Trap. Okay, so how big is this industry? Well, in 2023, sales exceeded 2 billion US dollars, which is big. But when you consider that in 2019, just 4 years back, it was about 600 million. That means that within this time, there's been uh, a growth that is over 300%. So the future for Webtoons, if it keeps this pace, is enormous. What's even more remarkable is that 80% of this amount is being taken up by Neighbor. So Neighbor has become a very big company, not only through its portal and other content, but also through its Webtoon sales, not only in Korea, but more than half now is consumed outside in other regions, such as the US. And sometimes, as we mentioned, one source, multiple use, people will be exposed to the original source by watching the derived content first. So it's a reversal in order. And just to give you an example, Marry My Husband, which was a very popular webtoon, sales of that webtoon increased, this is incredible, 17 times after the TV K-drama that was aired just recently, and which ended, starring Park Min Young and Na In. Let me talk about why I like webtoons. There are many reasons, and my philosophy is that webtoons are its own proper genre or medium. That's to say that it's like watching television or reading a novel or movie, but it's different. And in many ways, it's even better. I think that's not something that most people would think. But as a movie maker, I truly believe that. So let me just talk about some of them in just random order. One, of course, is the pacing, because unlike a film where you have a director uh, dictating how fast or how slow a film has to be seen, here it's closer to a novel because you decide how fast or how slow you will read or watch the webtoon. But it's better than the novel because it's a picture, and the way it's framed is closer to a movie. It's like a storyboard. You have establishing shots, and you can do a close up. You can have various angles, especially nowadays with the technology that almost simulates a camera angle. You have sound effects that the authors put in. So again, in that respect, it is like a movie. In some webtoons, they even add music. So from a sensory standpoint, it's better than a novel. It's like a movie, but again, with the pacing, uh, in that respect, it's at your desired level. And sometimes people miss out on the motivation of a scene that a director has, let's say in the movie. And here, because people self time the way they see it, they will not miss it. So even from the author's standpoint, it can actually be better because there's no guarantee that people will see a film twice, even if they miss it. So it's in between a novel and a movie, but it captures the best of both. It's very interactive, as all of us know, especially here in Korea. There are so-called 댓글, or the comment boxes where people can make very detailed comments to which people will rate those comments. And there's even a 배댓, meaning the best 댓글. So people pride themselves on being a good commentator. It's a source of pride. And I think that's what drives viewerships up. So it's like pressing like, but not in a only a quantitative sense, but also in a qualitative sense as well. And the authors read the comments, and sometimes they can actually uh, feel very hurt about what people say, because sometimes people can be very almost abusive, and but sometimes they can also be very constructive. And if there's a consensus that's formed on the comments, sometimes even the authors listen, and because they're done on this almost weekly basis, there have been occasions where they actually change the direction in which the story is headed. So there is that participatory aspect of uh, Webtoons that you don't have in other mediums like movies, which are made and nothing can be really changed. Of course, you have audience previews where sometimes the endings have been changed in movies, such as Fatal Attraction. But that, I think that's the exception and not the norm. Whereas here, I think there have been more exceptions. It can be very long run, as we'll see in some webtoons that I will introduce later. But it's not perfect. And I think what I would like to see in terms of webtoons, and there already are reverse adaptations where something like the mega hit Extraordinary Lawyer Woo, Woo, as we called it, 이상한 변호사 Woo, has been now adapted into a webtoon. So I wish more of that will happen, and I am trying to adapt some of my movies into a webtoon. so that I can reach uh, a bigger audience. And that's something that I left out. I think Webtoons provide authors with a chance to explain in a more detailed way the backstory of characters, which can't be done in movies where the actors know them because they have discussions with the writer, director, but sometimes you have to interpret what the backstory is, and and you don't have the luxury of going into the real depth of the backstory with flashbacks and so on. Whereas here, you can develop that backstory to a greater extent. Okay, I wish uh, the webtoons don't have to necessarily be so long, and that's my wish for my webtoon if I were to develop it. So I wish there were short story style webtoons that can just end in maybe a month, meaning just instead of having a year's worth of content, just maybe 8 episodes, like a novella. And finally, I wish there were much more international themes. And I think that would promote, but in a Korean style. So we have adapted webtoons from Asian content, especially from Japan, some from China, but knowing also the rich uh, history of short stories in Latin America, such as works by Borges. Um, I wish some of that will be adapted, and likewise for content from North America, as well as from many European countries. Okay, so because K content, especially webtoons, are adding to the K power or the soft power that Korea is now enjoying, the government has been very active through the Korea Creative Content Agency, also known as KOK. So I would highly recommend, whether you are just a student or especially a marketer interested in somehow using K content, especially webtoons, for your business, because that's something that we see now, for example, with luxury brands, that they are coming to Korea and they're using Korean models, and models can be very expensive. So a character in a webtoon is something that can be used to market your products, and they don't have to be from Korea. So I think Coca is actively courting foreign um, brands and content creators to collaborate with Korean content. And they participated in ComicsCom in New York, which is the largest content expo last year, to promote Webtoon IP to foreign content adapters. So I'm looking forward to the day. So we know Netflix is a big um, producer of adaptations of webtoons, and so maybe uh, foreign movies can be made with Korean Webtoon content. Okay, so Coca publishes reports annually, so I would recommend that you go check that out as well. And let me just report on some of the findings that they found from last year, which may be of interest to you. So, for example, uh, we talked about OSMU, one source, multiple use. And so Webtoon finds itself being adapted into many other content. But the number one is movies, which have been used uh, with Korean Webtoons as its source. And people are highly satisfied with that. So among all the content, movies are number one at 71%. And satisfaction is at a very similar level. It's also used in dramas and web novels. And surprisingly, even though it has been adapted into games, uh, it ranked the lowest among the five cited at only 26%, having been adapted from K Webtoons. And the satisfaction level is a bit higher, but still not as high as that for movies. And they also report that almost half of the people surveyed, and these were people in Korea, have had some experience buying merchandise or goods, as we call them, based on Webtoon characters. And we can think of this as, for example, being like you buying something with Snoopy or Charlie Brown or Elsa or Anna from Frozen. This would be Disney. So the same is being found with Webtoon characters. So many items are being bought where you have some Webtoon character, and it's not a large market yet, but one that is growing. And the number one merchandise was stationaries at 19%. Then you also had foods and drinks using Webtoon characters. Okay, this I found a bit surprising, which is about the frequency of use. And for both men and women, more than 60% see it more than once a week. So it's two or higher. So I found that to be really quite impressive how much penetration Webtoons have made into the entertainment daily lives of people. So twice a week, and I would assume it's because most Webtoons are issued twice a week, and among teens, On the flip side, one of the answers that one could have taken was almost never. And it's very low, shockingly low. So for the whole respondents, it was 3.1% for men that responded almost never, and even lower for women, 2.6%. And this is, I think, within reason. Teens had the lowest response here, which was 2%. That, and I don't find that surprising. So they are constantly watching some form of Webtoon. And even for people in their 50s and 60s, it was in the 4% range that responded almost never. So even they are watching, you could almost conclude most people in Korea, regardless of age and gender, during a week are watching some form of Webtoon. And among the 50s and 60s, people who responded 3 to 4 times a week were 14% for people in their 50s and 10% for people in their 60s. So those aren't huge numbers, but then again, uh, many people are, even in that age category, uh, not exactly daily, but still pretty high, or watching Webtoons quite regular, regularly. And of course, the media of choice is portal sites, especially Neighbor. And a lot of people responded. About 50% responded they binge watch instead of having to wait um, every week or every 2 days. Maybe they wait until they're all out, or maybe there are a lot of issues to read and then binge and read them or watch them. Okay, this I found surprising, which was where do they watch them? And overwhelmingly, it was at home, because I would have thought that there was a sizable portion of people reading webtoons or watching webtoons, um, let's say on the subway or on the bus, and that was the number two answer, but it was only about 12%, and it was only for people in their 30s. So during commuting hours, it's not uncommon to see people scrolling their smartphones to watch a webtoon. So again, it's at home and the device of choice, despite the fact that at home you may have your PC, you may have your smart TV, but no, it is overwhelmingly smartphones, that small screen that they will use. And it's, uh, I think, probably because of the facility of their right thumb or left thumb, where you can just scroll down. And people are used to that. Okay, about the genre that people like to watch. Um, it differs between men and women. So I'll just read you off and I'll put it in subtitles. Number one is action. Number two is fantasy. Number three is comic slash gag. Number four is historical, which usually involves sword fighting. And number five is drama. Whereas in the case of woman, number one was drama. So you see a major difference between genders for preference of drama. And that was practically tied with modern romance, which wasn't even in the top five for men. And number three is gag. So, at least in terms of comic and gag, men and women are pretty much the same. Okay, number four is what we would pronounce in Korean 일상, and it means just daily life, run of the mill, daily life, what you didn't see in, in the among men, but which you do see at a very high number for women. And rounding out the top five list for women was fantasy. Last but not least, let me talk about some hidden gems, not hidden to Korea, but maybe hidden abroad. Um, and especially for people who want to really understand Korea and get to know Koreans in a very local way, these would be the webtoons that I would highly recommend. And if you speak Korean, that's great. But even if you don't speak Korean well, I think just understanding why Koreans are so into some special types of webtoons will allow you to have a deeper appreciation of this culture. So I will not talk about the usual suspects when we talk about webtoons, and they would be uh, titles like Musing and Itaewon Class and Sweet Home and All of Us Are Dead. And don't get me wrong here, because I love them all. So I watched them and I, again, like them very much. But since they have been discussed ad infinitum, I assume even outside of Korea, I will not belabor my liking for them, but instead concentrate on some webtoons that I suspect many of you will not be familiar with, starting with something called 마음의 소리. And 마음의 소리 is what I was referring to, which I was kind of giving you a teaser on before when I said some webtoons can last almost decades, which is what happened with, and it's translated as Sound of Your Heart. And the author is Cho. And the hero in this webtoon is also named Choseok. So it's almost it's an auteur. So to use a French word, uh, perhaps it's based on his life. And maybe that is part of why it has been so successful because it's very authentic. It rings true because it's about himself. And it's really hard to classify. It almost created a genre called byungmat. And byungmat is a word that is very hard to translate. It could be a combination of something being quite banal, nonsensical, tacky, oddball, B movie esque. All of these words, I think, would pertain to byungmat. But byungmat is something which is not just straightforward funny, but instead funny in a very odd kind of way. And so maybe a situation comedy like Seinfeld or Arrested Development, they would be, I think, good references to maybe compare from outside of Korea. So Seinfeld or Arrested Development, these are two shows that I think a lot of Koreans will not be familiar with, even though I loved both. And so maybe there's a reason why Sound of Your Heart or Maamisori was not uh, popular outside of Korea. But again, uh, if you try harder, and in the case of Sound of Your Heart, I'll provide you a link. They have been animated for YouTube, and so you can watch Sound of Your Heart. And I do warn you that the subtitles that are generated automatically are not good. So maybe try to see if you can get a better um, translation that doesn't literally translate by word uh, and therefore ends up not being funny, but try to get something which is good. Sound of Your Heart had a 14-year run uh, on Webtoon with 7 billion, I repeat, 7 billion cumulative views. So Korea has a population which is around 50 million. And to think that just with Koreans watching it, it had 7 billion cumulative views is astounding. And a rating of 9.9 out of 10. It was made into a TV show drama in 2016, starring Lee Kwang-soo and Kim Dae-myung and Jung So-min, Kim Byung-ok, and Kim Mi-kyung, all fine actors. Lee Kwang-soo, of course, is very famous for being in Running Man, but it wasn't that successful. I think it had a 2-year run or maybe 1-year run. I think some webtoons, and this is something that I'll talk about later, I don't think really have to be adapted into TV. I think webtoon sometimes is its own proper genre, which can only be appreciated in that environment. So, of course, you have some things like Itaewon Class or Marry My Husband, which translates well into another medium, but I think some Webtoon content is better left alone. At least that's my opinion. So the link that I'll give you is something called the Ceiling Fan, and it has the two main characters, one being Choseok, and the other being his girlfriend, Ebong. And so it's about Ebong on a hot summer day installing a ceiling fan. And this is actually quite non-Byungmat funny. So it could very well be a Seinfeld or Arrested Development episode. So just all hell breaks loose. Everything, I mean, Murphy's Law, that can happen in a bad way, does happen. And it is ridiculous how it's conveyed. Um, the storm, the hurricane that envelops within the house of Ebong. And if I can spoil some of the things that happen, how it's solved is Deus ex machina type of solution where Choseok breaks the fourth wall. I'm using a lot of film talk here by saying that this is a cartoon. So in cartoons, anything can be solved. So it's not reality. And so I found that to be, again, very funny. Something akin to the narrative or narrator, Helen Mirren, saying in Barbie that you have Margot Robbie being casted and getting a laugh from that by breaking the fourth wall. So watch that episode, and I hope many episodes can be watched by non-Koreans because it does get at how even in the trivial things in life, we can find humor in it. So it's a very slow burn, but often humor is a slow burn. Life can be a slow burn, and life can be hard. Life can be very mundane, but we can find humor in it, and which I think is the universal message that Sound of Your Heart, because all the titles seem dramatic, but when you actually go into the various issues, you find that they're quite banal, and yet we make trivial thing. We sweat the small stuff, and maybe that's what it's saying. Don't sweat the small stuff, as that bestseller would say. I should also mention the artwork of Sound of Your Heart is, it looks as if a child drew it, and maybe that is part of the attraction. It's not very sophisticated like other webtoons where you have a lot of coloring and a lot of action, but even the artwork is very primitive and very basic, and in some cases a bit grotesque. So in that respect, it's almost like South Park, even though it doesn't go to that extreme in its humor. Um, so so even the artwork, I think, is part of the nondescript artwork, is part of the charm of Sound of Your Heart. Okay, the next webtoon that I would highly recommend, which ran from 2014 to 2015. And it was authored by Milo, is the Korean title is Yatang 보고서. And if we translate that directly, it sounds quite indecent because it's report from the woman's public bath. But don't get me wrong, because there's nothing racy or sexy about the content. Maybe from a promotional standpoint, for voyeuristic minded people, maybe it attracted people to the webtoon, but the way it's drawn, there are nothing to suggest actual private body parts. So it's almost gender neutral in that respect. But the situation is about women going to a public bath, Milo, at times with Ayan or Miss A, her friend. Her mom appears, her older sister appears, and in some situations, there is a coffee ajumma. Ajumma is an older lady. It's like an aunt, but we call them ajumma. Sometimes workers in a restaurant can be an ajumma. There's a coffee ajumma, and she's almost like I mentioned Seinfeld before, a soup Nazi in that show. So it's almost sometimes people who act against your wishes, even though they're not necessarily inherently evil. This too is also animated on YouTube. It's one of the ilsang, daily life kind of webtoon, which is more popular for women than men. And I think people outside of Korea may not know, but Korea has this long running culture about going to a public bath, even if you have a nice shower, nice tub at home. People go to a public bath, often with someone they know, be it a friend or a family member, and they can help each other in the bath, because Koreans are very clean and they want to be even cleaner. So sometimes to, let's say, sponge your back, that is a sign of affection among Koreans, that someone will sponge or lather up and sponge you off and water you off, and you become spanking clean. In fact, you used to have, I'm not sure if you still have it, professionals inside bathrooms who could do it for you. So you can pay them for you to get this rub down, a clean down inside the bathroom. So it's very communal. So Koreans are still very communal, and so they in Japan is like that too, where you have public baths, and you have them in Europe, and so maybe this is less familiar to Americans, but in many cultures, um, going to a bath is very common, and it used to be a daily activity. And so this webtoon is very funny because Milo finds humor in these daily situations, such as going into a bath and to finding new trends such as drinking iced coffee, discovering that you can buy and drink iced coffee while you get the bath, and because sometimes you're sweating and therefore an iced coffee would be preferred over a hot coffee, and that's where the coffee ajumma uh, is like a villain because there's one issue where they haven't finished their coffee and unbeknownst to Milo, who was just plunged into the hot, um, large um, bath, which is shared by many people. She's trying to acclimate to the heat and forgot that she had left her coffee. Um, and the coffee ajima or the coffee Nazi has come and just swiped it away. One of the funnier episodes, which I'll provide a link here, is when you have these two elementary school kids with their mothers, and they're all, of course, naked in the bath, run into their elementary school teacher and recognize her and promptly go and bow to her, as most kids will, in a very formal way. So they go and greet her, not only greet her, but pay their respect to the teacher by bowing. And of course, the teacher is shocked. She did not want to be recognized by her pupils, who then call their mothers over and tell them, "Oh, this is our teacher," and she's even more red-faced. And the parents give her literally a look over, not just at her face, but her body. And so it ends with the teacher asking all of the students about etiquette and saying and asking, "What do you do when you see your teacher outside the classroom?" And everyone responded, "Oh, we, of course, bow and respect you." And she said, "No, uh, you don't do that everywhere. You should really have a sense of knowing when to do it and when not to." And so it flips the cultural rules that we have and makes fun of it. So it's, in a way, you had to be there kind of humor, but the genius of these webtoons is that they put you in that situation, as did similar shows like the ones mentioned, Seinfeld or Arrested Development. Finally, on a much more serious note, let me talk about a webtoon, which is actually very serious. And it's called Oh, I Left My Wallet. Chiga, as Koreans affectionately called it. 지갑을 놓고 왔네. It's said in a short way, which came out in 2016. And it was authored by 미역의 효능, which literally translates into the power of seaweed. Seaweed is something that Koreans eat a lot of, especially as soup. It's also what you eat when you eat kimbap. And the main characters are Rosunyi, the young mother, and Noru, who is her deceased daughter, who she lost when she was 9, I believe, um, via a tragic accident. And so it's this relationship that this unwed mother, so she had her out of wedlock, has with her ghost daughter. And on the face of it, it's very depressing. And the way it's drawn is very depressing. So there is almost something very artistic in not only the storytelling, but also in the artwork, very postmodern, you might say. You might even think of Egon Schiele um, in terms of the um, the etchings that uh, he had that you can see when you go to Vienna. Um, and yet it's very heartwarming at times because it's about survival. So in that sense, I think a good analogy in terms of the theme of the webtoon is gravity. Because if you think about Sandra Bullock, the main character, it's about how she survives despite all the obstacles she faces being stranded in space and all the scar tissue that she too has, thinking about her daughter, who she lost through an accident, but how she draws strength and the will to overcome her situation from her deceased daughter. So a lot of the episodes talk about um, how we are superficial in how we judge people. Uh, and we can do it through the station that one has in life or the kind of trappings that one um, flaunts. And I talked about this when I talked about Phylon and the message of that movie and what Cheminshik does. And so this webtoon is like that as well. That despite how other people are and how unrepenting they may be, you can still find and be true to yourself. And through that, empower yourself and essentially win and not lose. And those of you who are familiar to Korean literature, there are very many famous Korean women authors like Han Gang, who wrote The Vegetarian, and also The Cursed Bunny, which was authored by Borajan. And both books won the Booker International Award. And so some may argue that uh, thematically this is very feminist, but I don't see it that way. I think, if anything, it's very gender neutral because the message that I talked about above is not just limited to women. And Cheminshik in Thailand, again, is a man who finds himself in a very similar situation. So I think men, not only in Korea, but men elsewhere, can draw strength from many of the messages that are conveyed, I think, very, very well. So I think it speaks about the human condition and humanities and what values one should have in life. And so that's what I found very refreshing in a webtoon, which is not a common source where one can find such value. Okay, so I hope you found this episode to be interesting, and tell me if you want more episodes like this. That does it for this episode on Webtoons. See you in the next episode of We Musings by Daeryun. 안녕.